Welcome to the second edition of the Boatcast. We are back and we will be back again and again. Like the sea, like the waters, like the waves. Just keep coming back. So, and this is very quick. This edition is special because it is part of the Muziris International Spice Route Conference, which has invited scholars from across 22 countries and various parts of India who are expert on the Indian Ocean, on maritime traditions, and man, there's so much to learn. It has just satiated that curiosity I had, but I am looking for more. This is being brought to you by ARI Archives and Muziris Heritage Projects. With me today is one such scholar, a scholar who now I have to read. Yes, a scholar who has an expert on Portuguese traditions, but there is a particular aspect of Portuguese tradition. With me is Dr. Hugo Cardoso.
That's right.
It is not in Cardozo, as we Indians usually write. It is with an S.
That's right.
He is a researcher of language contact, and he has studied the journey of languages, like this journey. So it's very apt, Hugo, here with us.
Absolutely.
He's had a degree in modern language and literature from the University of Coimbra, which is in Portugal. Lisbon? Is it in?
No, it's just
Coimbra?
north of Lisbon. Yeah, it's a different place.
Oh, it's a different place. And he's done MPhil and PhD at University of Amsterdam. And apart from that, he has been in the Lisbon Faculty of Art. He's been in the University of Hong Kong and Macau.
That's correct.
And he is an Indophile. I think you spend a good 6 months here in India.
Well, in total, probably more than that.
Yeah.
Over the years, over many visits, more than that, I'm sure. Yes.
So you.
I've never calculated actually, but it's
Uh-huh.
it's more. Yeah. Because sometimes I come for 1 month, sometimes I come for 2 weeks, sometimes I come for 3 months.
So I should call you Hugo Bhai. Huh? You're a bro. Indian. So Hugo, actually, India has been discovered by Vasco da Gama, as they say,
Mm-hmm.
discovered by the Western world or the colonial world, and which is Portuguese, and that you have shown interest in these studies.
Mm-hmm.
What tell me about your childhood, or what interested you to take this up as your life's cause and life's purpose?
Well, it's not immediately obvious from my life history that I would focus on Asia at all, because in fact, as you mentioned actually at the introduction, I studied modern languages. I studied Portuguese and English. This was my major. And what happened then is that, during that course, I realized that I liked linguistics, but also I had a professor, John Holm, who was my professor at the time at Coimbra University, who works on language contact. He works on Creole languages. And the way that he talked about what happens when languages meet was something that really excited me. So I realized, okay, this is an interesting avenue for me to pursue. And my first foray into that was actually not related with India.
Oh,
It was about a Creole language that is spoken in Suriname in South America.
okay.
But then this was for my master's, and then for my PhD, I realized, okay, there's a lot of people working in the Atlantic world from this perspective of language contact. There's not a lot of people working on Asia, so let me shift, right? And that's how it happened. I realized that there were opportunities of research to be done here in India, so I just came here for the first time and I was hooked.
Yeah, and looking at the paper, I'm good. I didn't know that there was a Creole because when we hear about Creole, we think of Suriname, we think of Mauritius,
Right, and the Caribbean
the Caribbean, but most of them were islands we associate with indentured labor and slavery.
That's right.
So, so you chose a area where there was occupation, right? Where
Yes.
Portuguese occupied.
The settings of plantations, which we associate with the Caribbean and
Okay.
some parts of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, are obviously settings that are conducive to that kind of language contact and language change, but they're not the only ones. Usually, in the literature you make a distinction between plantation Creoles, which are the ones formed in those settings where you have a lot of people with different languages coming in into the same place, and then fort Creoles, which are the ones created around forts, typically colonial settlements. And the cases of those languages here in South Asia are more like the fort Creoles. Definitely the case of Cochin, where we are now.
So it is Fort Cochin as much as it is Fort Creole.
Yes, exactly.
Huh?
So this kind of colonial settlements were places where multilingual communication happened, and this is one of the basic elements to creating a new language that we call a Creole, and those conditions were met in places like Cochin.
Okay. What is and this this whole podcast we are going to meander because I am a little bit of a fluff head, but that's good.
Yes.
Because that's good for a scholar because that's a that's a contrast and it'll be make for a great conversation, and I really want this to reach out to many people so that many students can rabbit hole into what you're saying, because it should not just your knowledge should not be just left in archives.
Yes.
It should be out in the open. So I'm curious, what is a contact language? What do you mean by contact language?
There's a number of different meanings to that expression, but in the branch of linguistics that I work with, contact languages are languages which are deeply transformed through contact among two or sometimes more than two languages. There's a number of different categories that you can use to describe them: Pidgins, Creoles, mixed languages. But what they have in common is really this: that the encounter between 2, 3, 4, however many languages has had a kind of transformative effect and created something that was not there before. So those are contact languages, and Creole languages are, by definition, contact languages.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So the Portuguese came around, I think,
1498.
so 13th century, is it? No,
The very end of the 15th century, and then
the very end of the 15th century.
and then throughout the 16th century, they established their network of settlements here in Asia.
Were there any trade contacts before that, like any semblance, not like conquest, but definitely trade contacts?
Between Portugal and India?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a historian, so I will not say much about history because I could be wrong. There was definitely trade, trade in spices that went all the way to Lisbon before that. And the idea here was that, Vasco da Gama and others before him were trying to find a more direct sea route that they could use to come to India. So it's not like there was no knowledge of Asia. There was, right? Asia was known, the riches of Asia were known, and that's really why first the Portuguese and then the other Europeans set out to trying to find a way to come here.
Yeah. So you talk about So the entire you've done research in the entire western region, right from Gujarat to let's say Kochi,
And even in Sri Lanka as well.
and you go down to Sri Lanka.
That's right.
And here you have been studying the effect of or the contact language of how Portuguese affected the local population and how it changed per region. Now let's start from the very top of geographically.
Yes.
So Diu,
Yes.
Diu, you spent a lot of time there.
I
In
did.
Diu, as a young man when you might be having hair.
Oh, yes. I had hair.
hair. So in Diu, you write about DIP, Diu Indo Portuguese, which is not Creole, but you call it Diu and not Dio because it's very easy to get it mispronounced as Dio Indo Pro, like duo. So Diu Indo Portuguese. So could you throw some light on that and tell us more about it?
Well, naming these languages is a thorny issue
Oh,
because the very term Creole and the concept of Creole as a category of languages is debatable, and there are some reasons why it's not absolutely clear whether or not you should actually use Creole. But maybe you can use it as a category, as to indicate a contact language, a language born out of contact. But should you really use it as the name of the language? There's a debate. I sometimes use it, I sometimes don't. And when I was working on Diu, which is for most people a Creole language, I decided to call it Diu Indo-Portuguese because by using Indo-Portuguese, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that the language is really a combination of Portuguese on the one hand, but also Indian languages. And in the case of Diu, especially Gujarati, because that's the dominant language there, right? So I wanted to draw attention to this, let's say, duality and this dual source of linguistic influences, which goes into creating what you call Diu Indo-Portuguese. You can also call it Diu Creole if you want. You can call it whatever you like. It's really a contact language that was born out of many strands of linguistic contact from the 16th century on.
yeah, but it's interesting and I appreciate it. In fact, that caught my attention that you have named it, been very sensitive about naming it. Like Creole can have many connotations. And another other such language, I don't know whether it's a language or it's a dialect or it's a spoken language or contact language, is Pidgin.
Yes.
So Pidgin, whenever I hear Pidgin, I almost feel like it's like a slur. It's not a language, you know. Why do they call it Pidgin? And since you look into the origins of languages, I want to know more about it. And it comes from the same source.
It does. It does. In fact, again, these these labels are a bit slippery. But traditionally, anyways, in the literature on language contact, Pidgins and Creoles in many ways are similar. They're all languages born out of linguistic contact. The essential difference between the two is that, or at least that's how it's proposed in the literature, is that Pidgins are not used as mother tongues, as first languages of a community, whereas Creoles are. And very often it's assumed that a Pidgin can turn into a Creole when it becomes a community's mother language, main language of communication, I'd say. So they're not that different. And in fact, they can be, Pidgins and Creoles can be quite similar in many ways. But the essential difference really is this, whether or not they're associated with a particular community as their own language, or in that case it would be a Creole, or whether it's more of an instrumental language that's used for day-to-day activities and particular communicative settings, and that would be a Pidgin.
When the Portuguese came, they there were a lot of forts built, and they took over a lot of areas.
Yes.
Diu Dadra Nagar Haveli is one of them. Then they moved south and up till here. How did the language, the Portuguese language, change from Du till it reached Cochin, and then let's also talk about how it went to Sri Lanka. So just I want that entire journey because anyways we are on a journey. So let's.
Yes, it's actually the other way around. It started here.
Oh,
It started.
it?
It started here in Kerala on the Malabar coast, because this is where the first forts were set up.
So sorry to cut you,
Yeah.
but it's so silly that we think linear and it is actually,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I find Kerala and the linguistic contact that happened in Kerala so important, because historically it makes sense that whatever happened here first then had an impact on what developed elsewhere, right? So it started here. The first, Vasco da Gama's original Armada lands in Calicut, right? So it was here, and then the first fortresses and trading posts that the Portuguese set up are all here in Cochin, Cananore, Kolam, Calicut, Cranganore. Those are the first ones. So the encounter of the Portuguese with Asia, but also the encounter of the Portuguese language with Asian languages, started here in the Malabar, and then the other places are set up later. Now, you were asking me how are they transformed. That's a good question. It's a question that we have to try and gauge by looking at the modern varieties of these languages, because we don't really have records from the 16th century. Like, who was speaking to whom and what were they speaking like and what languages were involved in this communication. We don't really know that, but we have intuitions. And one of the strands of my work and other people's work who have been working on the Asian Portuguese Creoles is really to try and understand why are they different and how are they similar. So what were the, let's say, the processes by which perhaps some varieties moved from one place to the other, and then when they came into contact with a different local language, they transformed and became something else. But that's an ongoing question. There's a lot of research going on into trying to figure out what the historical processes were.
Yesterday you used in Malayalam, it is a window which we see is called Janal.
That's right.
Janal, right?
Yeah.
Is that a Portuguese origin?
That's a Portuguese term, yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising, right? That such a day-to-day object would have a loan word, but it's true. And I think most languages in South Asia use...
Loans happen both ways?
Oh, yes.
Yes? So could you give us an example of that?
Well, the Asian languages took a lot of terms from Portuguese. Janela, window, is one of them. Then it crops up with, it's transformed and integrated differently in different languages, of course.
But it doesn't go to Goa.
Yes, it does, I think. I think in Konkani they also use that term for a window, yeah. Okay. Actually, that one is very widespread.
Okay.
Some of these Portuguese loans are quite widespread. Some are just local to a particular language or a couple of languages. But then you were asking me about the other way around. It also happens. And Portuguese has also absorbed a lot of Asian terms. Some of them didn't last very long, so they were used for a while and for specific Asian references, but then they never became widespread in Portuguese. But many of them did become widespread. Like, the word for tea, which is chá, is, yeah. And that's used in every variety of Portuguese around the world now.
Because we didn't have tea?
We didn't have tea. There was no tea. This is often the case. Many, it doesn't explain everything, but many of these loan words, which go one way or the other way, they accompany the products that they reference. So in that sense, a lot of the Portuguese terms that you find in Asian languages are referencing things which were not known in Asia before the Portuguese arrived here, including a lot of products from the Americas, which were at that time being transported and consumed by Europe and transported also to Asia. Things like some fruits like pineapples and cashews and things like that. And then the names of these products were, transported as well as the products.
So, yesterday I heard you say that ananas is a Portuguese origin.
No, actually, this is It was brought here through Portuguese as by the medium of Portuguese, but it's actually a term that Portuguese had taken from an Amerindian languages of South America, namely Tupi. So Portuguese takes it along with the fruit, takes the Tupi word, and then carries both the fruit and the name to Asia.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. What are the other fruits they got, and along with it, the names?
Cashew is another one.
Okay.
And then there are some.
Kaju.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We call it cashew as well in Portuguese. And then you also have some, well, not the name, I don't think, but the product, the chili, right, is also an American product. So it was all introduced at that time here in Asia. But then you also have some, objects, products, foods that are European in origin, and they were also introduced here at the time. An interesting case, I think, is the term for cabbage, right, which is couve in Portuguese, and apparently it also pops up similarly in South Asian languages.
Yes, in Hindi it is kobi
Kobi.
or
Yeah.
gobi.
Yeah, and that's a European product. It's not not an American one.
Yeah, and both cabbage and cauliflower are gobi. One is called full gobi, which
Yes.
is flowered gobi, and there's just.
Yeah.
So now I want to ask you: was there a hierarchy in the language? Like there is a puritanical Portuguese.
Mhm. I mean, the hierarchy, linguistic hierarchy, and social hierarchy are essential to this history of language contact. And it's quite obvious that contact languages throughout their history have always been seen as adulterated, corrupted, inferior varieties of typically the European languages that they are seen to be associated with. So this kind of judgment has historically been there. It has historically been a problem for these languages to affirm themselves, right? I think we are now finally, beginning to move beyond this kind of evaluation and looking at these languages as languages in their own right, with their own value. But this has been a problem. Now, when it comes to Portuguese in this case, or the so-called the colonial languages, the European languages that were spread through colonialism, it's quite interesting that right now it's quite evident that these languages have their own standard varieties, and those standard varieties are seen as highly prestigious, and and then you have the purists who don't really like it to move and don't like it to change and insist on that standard. But it's quite interesting that, at least in the case of Portugal, perhaps also Spain, this idea of a standard, the need for a standard, the focus on a standard, is something that was happening as they were building their colonial empires. So it happened at the same time, not by chance. It is because they saw their language as an instrument of empire building, let's say. So this is where you start getting the first grammars of both Portuguese and Spanish. This is when you start getting this discourse of a standard language, a pure language, the need for everybody to speak the same way. So those processes are actually historically intertwined, colonialism, expansion, and a focus on standard varieties of national languages.
Now I'm going to touch upon a bit of a prickly issue.
Yeah.
The propagation of religion and proselytization.
Mm-hmm.
That is deeply connected with language,
It is.
because texts of these religions and these uh, ideas and ideologies are in that particular language. So, how much of Portuguese language played a role in that, and how did it transfer?
I think the two processes are very deeply linked, especially here in these Asian settings. Surely the propagation of the Portuguese language and then the transformation of the Portuguese language by contact is very often associated with missionary activities. Not just because of the texts they were mentioning, but also because of the language that was used for liturgy and for daily communication with the Catholic communities. And it's quite evident here in Asia with Portuguese because for the first few centuries, Catholic missions were basically funded by the Portuguese crown, right? It's what we call the Portuguese patronage, padroado, the royal patronage, which means that the missionaries were coming here and doing their activities here were from many different places in Europe, but they would all, we can assume they would all have at least some knowledge of Portuguese because they were operating under that institution of the patronage, right? And some other scholars of Asian Portuguese communities have also pointed out that, if you have a community that converts, that becomes Catholic, then it is at least culturally, it culturally shifts towards the Portuguese. And this is one of the reasons why there might be this impulse to take up Portuguese or a variety of Portuguese as the community's language. So I think the two are very deeply linked. And that's also why to this day, these Portuguese-based Creoles spoken here in Asia are also very deeply linked with the Catholic communities, because it's typically them that, even if in the past other communities also used these languages, right now they're the ones who preserve them and consider them their own.
I've always, and since you're a scholar of languages, we connect language and religion so easily across the world where it should not be, right?
Yes.
It is just a medium of communication. Suddenly it becomes the language of the gods and of a particular faith. Let's talk about rhythm, because this is floating, and rhythm plays a huge part in language, dialects, and how did the local rhythm change or intermingle with Portuguese, and it changed across India. And also, after which, I want you to talk about, and then we'll end the show. We'll go back. We'll talk about sojourn in Sri Lanka.
Yes, rhythm in language is one of the components of something we call prosody. Prosody has a number of
Sorry, what?
prosody. So a number of elements that make up the way a particular language sounds, rhythm, pitch, etc. All of that is prosody, and each language has its own. It's quite interesting because people like myself have been looking at these languages, these Creole languages here in Asia, not just in India and Sri Lanka, but also in places like Malacca, Macau, etc. And we typically deal more with things like the lexicon, the vocabulary, and grammar, and not so much with the sonic aspect of it, just because we're not trained in it. So this is to say that there's a lot of research to be done on prosody to find out things like what you were asking. So if you look at, let's say, Cochin Creole, right? How much of its prosody is actually Malayalam? Or how is it different from Malayalam, right? This still has to be done. But even without very deep studies on it, it's quite clear that there is an influence, because one of the first things that you, as a speaker of a variety of Portuguese or standard Portuguese from Europe, etc., one of the first things you notice when you listen to these Creoles is how their prosody is different, how they sound different, how there are these different intonations. And I'm pretty sure that that has a lot to do with the local languages that they've been in contact with for centuries.
Absolutely. And this, I am now talking to the students and young people listening and people who want to study this, to look into this aspect of languages.
Yes.
And prosody, and he can probably be a guide if you ask properly. Okay. Okay. Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka was my third project, let's say. So I started with Diu, then Kerala, and then Sri Lanka. And I became interested in Sri Lanka and decided to do some research in Sri Lanka because, as you know, there was the civil war in Sri Lanka. So for a long time, and this language, the Portuguese Creole, is now mostly actually spoken on the east coast of Sri Lanka, which was one of the hotspots during that period. So the Sri Lankan Creole was already known because in the 1970s, there had been a lot of research by a scholar named Ian Smith But then because of the civil war, it stopped. And once the civil war was over, I decided it would be interesting to go back and see, what the language was like, if it was still vital, and all of that. And that's why I decided to visit Sri Lanka and realized that the language is still very much alive in that part of Sri Lanka. So then I prepared a big project to do a documentation of it. So me and the team, we spent a long time there interviewing people about many things, to record their language, but also to record their oral traditions, including songs and dance.
Was there an influence of the Cochin Portuguese in Sri Lanka, or
That's a very interesting question, because when you compare the two, Cochin or Malabar Creole with Sri Lanka Creole, you find a lot of similarities. So out of all of these varieties of Asia, those two are the closest ones to each other. And that can be for a number of reasons. So again, we're hypothesizing here, right? That can be because there was some kind of transfusion between the two. But then the other element is that here in Kerala, the local language that impacted the Creole was Malayalam, right? And over there, it was mostly Tamil. And these are both Dravidian languages. They have a lot of similarities between themselves. So to what extent the similarities are related with the similar linguistic ecologies of the two varieties, or whether they were actually in contact with each other for a long time, is really an academic question that I don't have an answer for right now. But the similarity is striking.
I know Creole has reached straight down if you go from Sri Lanka to Mauritius and Reunion Island.
But that's a different story, because those are French-based
French
Creoles. Yes.
They are not in. They are
Not
French.
Portuguese-based. Yes.
Now that is an interesting one, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
So Creole has two mothers or two.
Oh, more actually. So um, in a Creole language, there is typically one language that provides most of the lexicon. We call it the lexifier language.
Okay.
And some Creoles have Portuguese as a lexifier, the ones we'll be talking about. Some have French lexifier, some are English lexifier, some are Dutch lexifier.
Why did you
So-
leave out the Spanish, your neighbors?
Some are Spanish lexifier,
Oh,
yes.
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just
No, they exist.
cracking a joke.
They exist.
Yeah, so that's interesting about Creole. It has many lexifiers. So was it the because of slavery, or was it or because of conquest, or why was it so?
A combination of all of those. You find these Creoles being developed in very different settings. Like in the beginning of our conversation, I was referring to that. In some cases, you have plantation settings, which are very much settings that were or endeavors that were dependent on enslaved people, right? So then you have really a very deep impact of the slave trade and people from different parts with different languages coming together in the plantations. That's one setting. And then these so-called fort Creoles are produced in a different kind of socio-historical setting. Let's take, for example, Cochin, right? We know that the Portuguese did import enslaved people. There was slave trade to Cochin. But not in the kind of numbers that you would expect if there was a plantation kind of economy, right? So smaller numbers. And in fact, one interesting consequence or document of the presence of African enslaved people here during the Portuguese period is the tradition of the Kapiri Mutapan.
Kapiri Muttapan.
The Kapiri Mutapan, which is very much related with Cochin and this part of Kerala, right? There's this idea of a spirit, the spirit of an African man, and I mean, I know it's a tradition that has quite an impact here, but I don't know much more about it. I only know that he's an African man, and there's this tradition that he was a slave of the Portuguese, and he was left behind when the Portuguese were ousted out by the Dutch, and he still roams the land, but I don't know much about it, so I will not continue because I'm afraid of making any mistakes.
No, but you don't have to worry about that. We are not claiming anything here. We are talking. These are conversations. We can be wrong. We can stand to be corrected, but we need to speak about it.
Of course.
Uh,
But I'm sure a lot of people from Kerala will know a lot more about Kaprimutapan
Yeah,
than
yeah.
myself.
So politics is played through languages actually.
Oh, yes.
Like Portuguese did it, English did it. Every
Of
even
course.
it continues till today. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
People wield power through languages. What is pepper called in Portuguese?
Pimenta.
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 Pimenta is also a surname.
It's also a surname, yes.
Yeah, pimento is a
No, pimenta. Just
Pimenta?
like that. Yes.
Yeah. And what is cardamom called in?
It's called cardamomo.
Oh,
So yes, it's not that different.
it's not this different.
An interesting story. It's perhaps a consequence. But so in Portugal we have typically two family names, one from the father's side, one from the mother's side, or we could have two from both sides. I have two, one from my mother's side, one from my father's side. Cardoso is from my father's side, and from my mother's it's Canelas.
Yeah.
And Canelas, it means a lot of different things, but one of the things it means is cinnamon.
Oh,
I think it's a consequence because it's just a coincidence because it also means reed, right?
oh,
And that's where we take the name for cinnamon.
there's a divine design that you had to work on the spice trade and the languages and how they traveled. Is Balti a Portuguese word?
Yes, that's what I see in the literature, that balti comes from balde, which means a bucket.
Bucket, right?
Yeah. Whether or not there was some sort of other intervening language, I can't be sure, because sometimes a language like Arabic could be a link between European terms and Asian languages. I'm not sure if that's the case with Balti, but it definitely.
With Balti, I remember this is a little trivia that I had caught some time back. When we are having a bath and drawing our water in a baldi in Mumbai and across India, in India now Hindi is like, so it may have a Portuguese
Yes,
influence.
very likely.
And when we are eating pineapple, ananas has Portuguese influence.
And when you're having a pau.
And a pao, the famous vada pao.
The pav bhaji.
Yeah, pav bhaji. So I invite you to Mumbai, and we are going to we are going to end this conversation about that little village in Danda.
Yeah, Kodlai. It's a very interesting situation. I haven't done any research on Kodlai Creole myself, but a colleague from the US, Clancy Clements, has. He spent a long time there, and he's done a grammar of this language. And what's interesting about Kodlai is that it's a small village just outside, or rather across the river from the ruins of a Portuguese fortress, which was the old town of Chaul, now Revlanda. And the story goes that when the Marathas take over and destroy this fort, the Catholic community moves across the river and establishes itself in this village of Kodlai. So they've been, in relative isolation for a while, for many centuries, and that's probably the reason why they have kept a Creole alive, which again is different from Malabar Creole. It's different from Diodaman Creole. It's its own variety.
So our next episode or next long form content will be in Kodlai.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I invite you to Mumbai, and thank you for coming. And I hope you
Thanks
had
for
a
having
good time.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you.
That's all.